The land itself was a hard master, a thing of rock and dust that stretched from one sunrise to the next without apology. It was the year 1880, and this part of the American West was a raw, unfinished thought, scrawled across the continent in canyons of red stone and prairies the size of oceans. The wind had a voice here. It spoke of emptiness and endurance, and it never, ever stopped talking. It whipped the canvas tops of the settlers' wagons and tore the collars of the blue-coated soldiers who marched from one patch of nowhere to another. This was a place where civilizations collided like thunderheads, a brutal testing ground for hunters, for families seeking a patch of soil to call their own, for government men trying to draw lines on a map that refused to be tamed, and for the tribes who had called this place home for more generations than the white man had words for. Into this furnace rode John Garrett. He was a man built of the same unyielding materials as the landscape. His shoulders were broad, settled into a permanent slump of vigilance, and his hands, resting easy on the reins of his dun mare, were scarred and capable. He was Irish-American, though the softness of the old country had been burned out of him long ago, leaving only the hard lines of his jaw and the unsettling blue of his eyes. Those eyes had seen the brick-lined streets of a city he no longer remembered with any fondness, and they had seen the muzzle flash of rifles in a war that was supposed to have saved a nation. That war, the one between brothers, had hollowed him out, taught him that honor and duty were just pretty words for dying in the mud. When it was over, he had turned his back on the whistles of factories and the chatter of polite society, a world that felt like a well-appointed prison. He came west seeking freedom, or perhaps just a place big enough to contain the restlessness that gnawed at him. What he found was not peace. The West was just a different kind of war, one fought with fewer trumpets and more desperation. He had drifted, scouting for the army for a time, then trapping, then guiding wagon trains through passes that had names like Devil's Gate and Widow's Hope. He fought when he had to, which was often. He fought the land. He fought the thirst. And sometimes he fought the men who thought a quick bullet was the easiest way to acquire another man's horse. And yes, he fought the tribes. He had traded lead with the Lakota and played a deadly game of hide-and-seek with the Apache. He held no special malice for them. They were just like him, trying to hold on to what was theirs in a world that was trying to tear it from their grasp. He respected their cunning, their toughness. It was a cleaner fight, in many ways, than the one he had left back east, the one fought with contracts and whispers and the slow suffocation of expectation. John Garrett did not believe in love. He believed in a well-oiled rifle, a sharp knife, and a horse that would not panic. Love was for men who had time for it, for men who lived in houses with solid walls and who did not wake up with the taste of grit in their mouths. He had seen what attachments did to men in this land. He had seen a settler stand stupidly over the body of his wife, staring at the arrows in her back, long enough for a warrior to ride him down. He had seen a soldier desert his post, driven mad by a letter from a woman 2,000 miles away, only to be caught and hanged. Love was a vulnerability. It was a chink in the armor, the one spot a man could be hit that would make him fall and not get up again. John had built his walls high and thick. He moved through the small, dusty settlements places with names like Deliverance or Hardscrabble like a ghost, taking what he needed and leaving before the sun came up. He shared whiskey with men whose names he did not ask for, and sometimes he shared a blanket with a woman in a canvas tent behind a saloon. But he left coin on the table and was gone before her eyes were open. He kept himself apart. And yet, there was Connie. The name was a splinter under his skin. He had not sought her out. Their paths had crossed like two hunting cats, wary and silent, in the high country months ago. She was Comanche, not just a woman from the tribe, but a warrior in her own right. He had seen her first from a distance, a lone rider on a painted pony, moving with a fluid grace that seemed part of the wind itself. She wore buckskins, like a man, and carried a rifle across her lap. Later, he had seen her up close. It was a tense standoff at a dry creek bed, both of them surprised, both of their hands moving toward weapons before they froze. He remembered her eyes. They were not soft or yielding. They were dark and deep, and held a fire that matched the land itself. They looked at him not with fear, but with a calculated assessment, a weighing of his threat. He had seen her again, twice. Never a word spoken between them, not a friendly one anyway. Just that electric space, that acknowledgement of two predators sharing the same territory. It was not love. He told himself that, fiercely. It was a curiosity, a strange knot in his gut that he could not untangle. He found himself watching the ridges for a lone rider, listening in the saloons for mentions of the Comanche bands. She was an enemy, by all the definitions the world provided. She was savage, wild, a threat to the order the government was trying to impose. But John Garrett had little use for the government's definitions. He saw in her the same thing he felt in himself, a refusal to be broken, a spirit that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees. This unspoken, unnamed thing between them was a puzzle, and John Garrett hated puzzles. They complicated the simple business of survival. His world was one of stark contrasts. The mountains clawed at a sky so blue it hurt to look at, their peaks white with snow even in the summer heat. Below them, the prairie rolled out in waves of brown and yellow grass, endless, hypnotic, concealing rattlesnakes and shallow graves. The settlements were wounds on the hide of this land, collections of raw lumber and canvas, populated by men with desperate dreams and women whose faces were already worn into masks of hardship. The air crackled with tension. Every wagon train was an invasion, every hunting party a theft. The tribes fought back with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, and the army responded with cold, methodical violence. It was a clumsy, bloody dance, and John was trapped in the middle of it, a man belonging to no one, allied only with the dun mare beneath him and the Colt revolver heavy on his hip. He rode now, not toward any particular destination, but away from the memories that nipped at his heels like dogs. The war was always there, just behind his eyes. The smell of powder smoke, the screams of men, the awful stillness of a battlefield at dawn. He had come west to find freedom, but freedom was proving to be a fickle thing. It was not just the absence of walls. It was the absence of ghosts, and his ghosts had ridden with him. He searched for a kind of peace he could not define, a quiet spot in the center of the storm. But the storm was everywhere. It was in the land. It was in the hearts of the people. And, most troubling of all, it was inside him. He was a man running from a war that had ended 15 years ago, only to find himself in a new one. And as he scanned the horizon, his thoughts, unwelcome and persistent, drifted back to the Comanche woman with the warrior's eyes, the one named Connie. He spat the dust from his mouth and urged his horse into a trot, as if he could outrun the complication she represented. He could not. The dust of his travel had settled into a fine, gritty paste on his skin, and the sun beat on his hat with a flat, mindless persistence. John Garrett kept his mare to a steady walk, conserving her strength, though his insides felt like a coiled spring. His thoughts were a thicket he could not seem to clear. Every time he tried to focus on the trail ahead, on the water level in his canteen, on the simple mechanics of staying alive, the image of the Comanche woman's face would rise before him. It was a distraction, and distractions in this land were fatal. He cursed himself for it. A low sound lost in the sigh of the prairie wind. He had business in Sweetwater, a rumor of work escorting a surveyor, but Sweetwater was still 2 days' ride, and the land between here and there was empty, or so he thought. The first hint of trouble was not a sound, but a smell, the sharp, acrid tang of gunpowder, faint on the breeze. John reined in his mare, his body going still. He was in broken country, low hills and rocky outcrops covered in sparse juniper. He nudged the mare into the cover of a dry wash, dismounted, and crept to the crest of the nearest rise. He lay flat, the warm rock pressing into his chest, and slowly pushed his hat back. What he saw turned his stomach to ice. Less than half a mile distant, a small cluster of riders was trapped against the sheer face of a box canyon. He counted 5, No, 6 of them. Comanche, an old man, 2 women, a boy who looked no older than 14, and 2 warriors. One of those warriors, sitting her pony with a stillness that was more dangerous than any movement, was Connie. His breath caught in his throat. Opposing them, fanned out in a loose, confident semicircle, was a patrol of United States cavalry. A dozen men, led by a sergeant with a thick neck and a sunburned face. They were not postured for a parley. Their carbines were unslung. It was not a negotiation. It was an execution in the making. John watched, his mind racing. This was not his fight. He knew the Army's standing order any hostiles found off the reservation were to be engaged. It was simple. Brutal arithmetic. He was one man. To interfere was suicide. And for a woman who would likely as not try to kill him the moment the soldiers were gone, he should have backed away, circled wide, and forgotten what he had seen. It was the smart play. It was the survivor's play. The sergeant raised his hand, his voice carrying thin on the wind. "Last chance. You heathens, surrender your weapons." The only answer was the sudden, defiant war cry from the young boy. It was a high, thin sound, more fury than substance. It was answered by a laugh from one of the soldiers. Connie shifted her pony, moving slightly in front of the old man. She held her rifle level. She was not surrendering. They were going to die there. John felt the old, familiar sickness rise in him. The sickness from the war. He had seen this before. The powerful arrayed against the weak. The casual certainty of the executioner. He had followed orders then, and the taste of it had never left his mouth. He looked at Connie, at the line of her back, proud and straight. He saw the boy, trying to puff himself up to meet a man's death. He saw the women, their faces like stone, ready. "Damn it all!" John whispered to the rock. His body moved before his mind had fully consented. He slid back down the rise, mounted his mare in one smooth motion, and pulled his Winchester from its scabbard. He was a fool. He was a dead man, but he would not be a coward. Not again. He did not ride at them. He rode parallel, keeping the ridge between him and the patrol, until he was on their flank. He was about 400 yards out, a long shot but possible. He took aim, not at a man, but at the large boulder just behind the sergeant. He did not want to kill. Not yet. He wanted to scatter. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound sharp and lonely. The bullet screamed off the rock, sending a spray of stone chips into the air. One of the soldiers' horses reared, screaming. The sergeant ducked instinctively, yelling in surprise. Where did that come from? John chambered another round. This time he aimed for the dirt at the hooves of a horse on the far end of the line. The puff of dust and the second shot sent the patrol into chaos. They had been expecting a fight from the front, not a phantom on their flank. "It is an ambush," one of the troopers yelled, his voice tight with panic. "There is a whole war party in the rocks." Form up, you idiots," the sergeant roared, fighting his panicked mount. But John's diversion had done its work. In that first moment of confusion, Connie and her small band had broken. They spurred their ponies, not trying to fight the patrol, but racing for a narrow cut in the canyon wall that John had not seen. A desperate bolt hole. Connie was the last to go, turning to fire one quick, defiant shot from her rifle before disappearing into the shadows of the rock. The sergeant, his face purple with rage, finally saw the lone rider on the ridge. John, one man. He saw the buckskins, the worn hat, a white man. "After him," the sergeant screamed, pointing. "That is a traitor, a damn squaw man, get him." Half the patrol, their blood up, turned their horses and charged toward John. The other half went after the Comanche into the narrow canyon. John did not wait to see more. He wheeled his mare and dug in his heels, plunging back down the way he had come. The race was on. He was now the prey. He had traded his anonymity, his quiet life, for this. The soldiers were on good horses, fresh, and they were angry. He pushed his mare hard, praying her endurance would be enough. He wove through a maze of arroyos and canyons, the air burning in his lungs. The shots behind him were sporadic, wild, but they were getting closer. He had made himself an enemy of his own kind. The army would post his name as a renegade, a traitor. He would be shot on sight. And the Comanche, he had saved them. Yes, but he knew their ways. They did not trust white men, and a white man who fired on soldiers was a mystery. A mystery was just another word for a threat. He was truly alone, trapped between two worlds, belonging to neither. He rode for hours, the sun climbing to its brutal zenith and beginning its slow descent. His mare was flagging, her sides heaving and streaked with foam. The soldiers were relentless. He finally managed to lose them in a dense forest of pine and aspen that clogged a high, shadowed canyon. The air was cooler here, the ground thick with pine needles that muffled his mare's hoofbeats. He found a thicket, a dense tangle of wild brush and fallen trees, and forced his way into its center. He dismounted, pulling his mare in with him. He stroked her neck, whispering to her, trying to calm her ragged breathing. He stood, his Winchester in his hand, and listened. The forest was silent, too silent. The birds had stopped singing. The only sound was the thudding of his own heart. He waited, every nerve ending screaming. He was a good tracker, but so were they. He had bought himself time. Nothing more. He stood frozen for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 10 minutes. His eyes scanned the dappled shadows, looking for the telltale blue of a uniform. Nothing. He allowed himself a slow, careful breath. A cold line of steel pressed against his throat. He did not move. He did not even breathe. The blade was sharp. He could feel its bite against his skin. "Do not speak, white man," a voice whispered in his ear. The voice was low and smoky and female. He did not need to see her to know. It was Connie. He had run right into her, or she had tracked him. It did not matter. She had found him. "I am not," he began, his voice a low rasp. The blade pressed harder, a single drop of his own blood trickling warm down his neck. "I said, do not speak. You fired on the soldiers. Why was it a trick?" "No trick," he said, forcing the words out. "They were going to kill you." "And you saved us!" Her voice was filled with a venomous disbelief. "A white man saves the Comanche, the wolf saves the lamb." "I am not a wolf," he said, "and you are no lamb." He felt a small, sharp intake of her breath. He could smell her, the scent of wood smoke, leather, and something wild, like the pines around them. He could feel the heat of her body behind him. "You are a traitor to your people," she hissed. "What does that make you?" "It makes me the man who kept you from being shot out of your saddle back there," he said, his own anger beginning to rise. "You can cut my throat if you want. It will save the soldiers the trouble, but it will not change what I did." She was silent for a long moment. The pressure of the knife did not lessen. He could hear her breathing, weighing his words, weighing his life. He was completely at her mercy. His rifle was useless, still clutched in his right hand, but pointed at the ground. "Where are the others?" he asked, breaking the silence. "The old man, the boy." "They are safe. They scattered. I came back for you," she said. "To thank me?" he asked, a bitter laugh in his throat. "To see what kind of man you are," she whispered. "To see why you did this. It makes no sense." Before he could answer, another sound cut through the forest. It was not the soldiers. It was the high, yipping cry of an Apache scout, and then another, from a different direction. Connie's body went rigid against his. She pulled the knife away from his throat in a sudden, sharp movement. "Apaches," she breathed, and the disbelief in her voice was replaced by a new, more immediate terror. "They must have heard the shooting. They are hunting." "Soldiers behind me, Apaches in front of me," John said, turning slowly to face her. She was just as he remembered. Her eyes were dark and fierce, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. but it did not diminish the proud, hard line of her jaw. Her hair was in 2 long braids, and a single eagle feather was tied at the back of her head. She held the knife in her hand, pointed at him, but her attention was now divided, her gaze flicking past him into the woods. "You are not with them," she stated. It was not a question. The Apaches were enemies to her people as much as the soldiers were. "No," he said. "And the soldiers are still hunting you," she added. "Yes." They were interrupted by a shout, much closer this time. A soldier's voice. "Over here I found a fresh track. A shod horse." They had found his trail. They were closing in, and the Apaches were in the woods ahead of them. They were caught in the jaws of a vice. Connie looked at him, her face a mask of conflict. He was her enemy. He was the man who had just saved her. He was a white man. He was a renegade. He was, at this precise moment, the only other person in this canyon who was not actively trying to kill her. A bullet suddenly snapped through the leaves just above John's head. So close, it tugged at his hat. The shot came from the ridge, from the soldiers. "They have seen us," Connie yelled. John did not wait. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her down behind a massive, rotting log. "Get down," he roared. A volley of shots followed, bullets thudding into the wood, tearing bark from the trees around them. They were pinned. John risked a glance over the log. He could see them, blue uniforms, moving through the trees, dismounted, advancing. "They are coming," he said, his voice flat. He looked at Connie. She was pressing herself flat against the earth, her rifle now in her hands. Her eyes met his. The hatred was still there, but it was overshadowed by a desperate, shared understanding. "We cannot stay here," she said, her voice low and tight. "I know a way," he said, his mind racing, remembering the lay of the land he had ridden through. "A deer trail, up the canyon wall. It is narrow, but it will get us above them, if we can make it." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. He had saved her life. Again. The debt was a physical thing between them, heavy and unwanted. She despised him for it, and she needed him. "You lead," she said, the words clipped. "I will cover you." He nodded. "On my mark. We run for the rocks." He looked at her one last time. This was madness. He was running for his life. His only ally a Comanche warrior who would as soon as kill him as look at him. But she was right. They could not stay here. "Now!" he shouted. He burst from behind the log, running low, his legs pumping, driving him toward the rock face 50 yards away. Connie was right behind him, a shadow at his heel. The forest exploded with gunfire. Bullets bit at the stones around their feet as they ran. A deadly hail that zipped and whined through the pine branches. John did not look back. He grabbed Connie's hand, his fingers wrapping around her wrist, and hauled her with him. She stumbled, but did not fall, her own strength matching his stride for stride. They reached the rock face, a sheer wall of granite, and John veered left, finding the opening he had seen, a crack in the stone barely wide enough for a man to pass. It was the deer trail. It was their only hope. "In here," he grunted, pushing her ahead of him. "Move." She scrambled into the narrow passage without hesitation. The trail immediately began to climb, a steep, winding staircase of broken rock and gnarled roots. It was less a trail and more a controlled fall, zigzagging up the canyon wall. John was right behind her, his hand on her back, steadying her, urging her on. Below them, the soldiers' yells grew fainter, frustrated. They could not follow on horseback, and the narrow opening offered a perfect kill box if they tried to follow on foot. For now, the pursuit was halted. They climbed for what felt like an eternity, their lungs burning, their legs turning to water. The air grew thinner, colder. Connie moved like a cat, her bare hands finding holds he could not see, Her feet shod in soft moccasins gripping the stone. He was clumsy in his heavy boots, but his raw strength kept him moving, kept him from slipping on the loose scree. Finally, Connie pulled herself over a lip of rock and collapsed onto a wide ledge, her chest heaving. John flopped down beside her, his back scraping against the granite. They were high, at least 500 feet above the canyon floor. They could see the forest they had just fled, a dark green carpet below. The soldiers were tiny blue dots, milling about near the spot where they had left their horses. For a full minute, neither of them spoke. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the high, thin cry of a hawk circling above them. John was the first to recover. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his rifle still in his grip. He scanned the ledge. It was about 20 feet long and 10 feet deep, sheltered from above by an overhang of rock. It was a good defensive position. It was also a trap. There was no way out but the way they had come. Connie had also sat up. She was not looking at him. She was looking at her hands, which were scraped and bleeding from the climb. She slowly, methodically, picked a small pebble from a cut on her palm. "Your horse is gone," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "So is mine," John replied, his throat raw. "And my saddlebags, all my gear." He had his rifle, his revolver, the knife at his belt, and the cartridges in his pockets. Nothing else. "We are trapped here," she stated, still not looking at him. "For now," he said. He uncorked his canteen, which was still slung over his shoulder. He had maybe half a quart of water left. He took a small sip, just enough to wet the dust in his mouth, then held it out to her. She stared at the canteen as if it were a snake. "Take it," he said, his voice rough. "You will be dead of thirst before the soldiers get bored, and they will not get bored." Her eyes lifted to his. The fire in them was banked, but it was not out. It was a deep, simmering coal of confusion and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was the world that hunted her, the world that had taken her lands, the world that had just tried to kill her and her family, and he was the man offering her water. The contradiction was a physical weight in the air between them. "Why?" she asked, her voice low. "First the soldiers, now this. Why do you keep me alive? White man!" "My name is John," he said, weary of the fight. "And I did not do it to keep you alive. I did it to keep me alive. They had us pinned. I needed you to cover me. You were no good to me dead." It was a lie, a brittle, clumsy lie, and they both knew it. He could have run. Maybe he could have tried to cut a deal. He had not. He had saved her. He had tied his fate to hers. She knew it was a lie, and it made her angrier. It would have been simpler if he was just a liar, or just a brute. This was complicated. She snatched the canteen from his hand and drank. A long, deep swallow. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and threw the canteen back at him. It thudded against his chest. "I owe you nothing," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "You saved me from the soldiers. True, but you put me in their sights to begin with. You and your kind." "My kind?" John let out a short, harsh laugh. "Lady, I do not have a kind. The soldiers down there want to hang me as a traitor. The Apaches in these woods want to take my scalp, and you have been deciding whether or not to cut my throat for the last hour. My kind seems to be in short supply." He took the canteen, screwed the cap back on, and set it down carefully between them. "We are in this together. That is the beginning and the end of it. We get out of this alive. We go our separate ways. You can go back to hating me then, but until then, we are all we have got." Connie stared at him, her internal war raging. Her father, Chief Tawapi, had warned her. He had spoken of the white man's poison. It was not just his whiskey, or his diseases. It was his words. They could twist a person's thoughts, make them forget their loyalties. This man, John, he spoke with a flat, hard honesty that was more dangerous than any lie. He did not pretend to be her friend. He did not ask for her gratitude. He simply stated the facts. And the fact was, she was alive because of him. This created a fissure inside her. Loyalty to her people was the air she breathed. It was her identity, her strength. Her family was still out there, scattered, hunted, because of the soldiers. And she was here, sharing water with one of the men who wore the same skin as those soldiers. She felt a pull toward him, a strange, unwelcome respect. He was a warrior, he was brave, and he was a fool. He had thrown his life away for people he did not even know. For her, the feeling was a betrayal. It felt like sickness, like she was turning her back on her ancestors, on her father, on the boy who had died in the Box Canyon. She looked away from him, out over the vast, empty land below, the territory that was no longer hers. "The soldiers will wait," she said, her voice quiet now. "They will starve us out, or they will find a way up." "They will not find this trail," John said. "Not easily, but they will bring in trackers. They will circle. We cannot stay here." "And where do we go?" she shot back. "We are on foot. We have no food and half a canteen of water. We are on a rock ledge. The only way is down, back into their rifles." John pointed up. "Not down. Up. This trail keeps going. I saw it when we climbed. It cuts back into the cliff. It will be harder climbing, but it might lead to the rim. If we can reach the rim, we can lose them in the high country." Connie looked at the trail, a narrow, treacherous path that disappeared into a shadow above them. It was a climb for mountain goats, not people. But he was right. It was the only way. The afternoon bled away. The sun began to dip, painting the western sky in brutal strokes of orange and purple. The air grew cold, a sharp, clean cold that cut through their thin clothing. The soldiers below lit fires, tiny sparks of orange in the gathering dark. They were settling in for a siege. "We wait for full dark," John said, his voice a low rumble. "We move when the moon is down." Connie nodded, hugging her knees to her chest. She was shivering. The buckskin she wore was tough, but it offered little warmth against the high-altitude night. John watched her. He saw the tremor in her shoulders. He had his jacket, a worn canvas thing lined with wool. He took it off. "Here," he said, tossing it to her. She flinched as it landed in her lap. She looked at the jacket, then at him, her eyes wide with suspicion. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a jacket," he said, his patience fraying. "You are freezing. I am less cold. Take it, or do not. It does not matter to me." He turned away from her, staring out into the darkness, making a show of ignoring her. He was lying again. He was cold, too, but the sight of her shivering, small and fierce on the rock, had triggered something in him he had fought to keep buried, the protective instinct he so despised. It was stupid. It was dangerous. Love got you killed, and this was not love, he told himself. It was just practical. She would be useless to him if she froze to death. Connie touched the jacket. The wool was rough, but it smelled of him canvas, sweat, and gunpowder. A man's smell, an enemy smell. She should have thrown it back in his face. It was an insult, but the wind was like a knife, and the cold was seeping into her bones. Slowly, reluctantly, she pulled the jacket on. It was huge on her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, but it was warm. The warmth was immediate, a guilty comfort. She hated him for it. She hated him for making her need him, for making her wear his scent. She felt the pull again, stronger this time. It was not just respect. It was something else, something deeper and more frightening. A curiosity about the man under the grime and the weariness. A man who fought his own people, who gave his jacket to a woman who held a knife to his throat. John, for his part, tried to ignore her. He tried to think about the climb ahead, about the soldiers, about the Apaches who were still somewhere in the dark. But his mind kept drifting. He was intensely aware of her, just a few feet away. He was aware of the sound of her breathing, the way she tucked her feet under the jacket. He had not believed in love. He believed in walls. But this woman, this enemy, had somehow slipped past his defenses. He did not want to feel this. He did not want this complication. He had sought freedom in the West, and instead he had found this: a cage made of rock, and a woman who represented everything he was supposed to be fighting. The land was at war. The soldiers were fighting the tribes for every square inch of prairie, for every river, for every mountain pass. The white man was trying to draw his lines, build his fences, and say, "This is mine." The Comanche, her people, were fighting to keep the world they had always known, a world without lines. And here they were, one of him and one of her, trapped on a ledge. Enemies by every definition but the one that mattered at this moment: survival. The tension between them was no longer just the sharp edge of animosity. It had become something thicker, more complex. It was the shared breath in the cold air, the unspoken debt, the magnetic pull of two people who recognized the same strength, the same stubborn refusal to die, in each other. It was not love. It was something far more raw and dangerous. It was a connection. And in this land, at this time, that connection was a betrayal. She felt it, a twisting in her gut that she was betraying her family by accepting his warmth. He felt it, a voice in his head screaming that he was a fool, that this woman was a distraction that would get him killed. But neither of them could break it. The moon slipped behind the peaks. The soldiers' fires were just embers. It was time. "Let's go," John said, his voice quiet in the dark. He stood up and reached a hand down to her. Connie looked at his hand, large and scarred in the faint starlight. It was the hand of a killer. It was the hand that had saved her. She looked at it for a long second. Then, ignoring it, she rose to her feet on her own. She was still wearing his jacket. "I can climb," she said. "I know," John said, pulling his hand back. He turned and began the ascent into the darkness. She followed, the only sound their hands and feet on the rock, and the heavy, complicated beat of their hearts. The climb was a blind, vertical nightmare. They moved by feel, their fingers raw, their muscles screaming in protest. John went first, his boots scraping for purchase on holds he could not see. He would find a stable spot and then reach down, his hand closing around Connie's forearm, hauling her up the last few feet. Twice, his boot slipped, sending a shower of pebbles rattling down into the blackness. They would freeze, listening, their hearts pounding in their throats. But no sound came from below. The soldiers were blind, deaf, and rooted to the canyon floor. Just before dawn, when the blackness had faded to a bruised purple, John pulled himself over the final edge and collapsed onto flat ground. He was on the rim. The air was thin and bit at his lungs. He lay on his back, gasping, the stars wheeling dizzily above him. A moment later, Connie scrambled up beside him. She did not collapse. She crouched, her head turning, her senses probing the new terrain. She was still wearing his jacket. They were on a high mesa, a flat, wind-swept table of rock and sparse, thorny brush. The world had opened up. To the east, the prairie was a vast, dark ocean. To the west, the mountains climbed even higher, their peaks like jagged teeth against the first hint of morning light. They were exposed, but they were free of the canyon. "We have to move," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Before it is light, they will see us from below." He nodded, forcing his body to obey. He got to his feet, his legs shaking with exhaustion. "Which way?" She pointed not west, toward the deeper mountains, but north, along the rim. "My people, they have a camp, a hidden place, 2 days' walk, if they are still there, if the soldiers did not find them." They began to walk. It was a silent, brutal march. The sun came up, and it was not a friend. It baked the rock, reflecting into their eyes. They had no food and only a few sips of water left in the canteen. John's boots, so sturdy in the forest, were clumsy and loud on the rock. Connie moved in her moccasins with a silence that shamed him. By midday, John's stomach was a hollow ache, and a dull headache had begun to throb behind his eyes. He watched her. She never complained. She walked with her head up, her eyes scanning the horizon, reading the land in a language he did not understand. The connection that had formed on the ledge, that fragile, unspoken truce, was stretching thin. The animosity was returning, cooled by exhaustion, but still there. They were from different worlds, and the daylight made that painfully clear. He was a white man, a renegade, and he was following a Comanche woman to her hidden camp. The madness of it was not lost on him. He knew, with a cold certainty, that he was probably walking into his own death. Her people would not welcome him. Late in the afternoon, Connie suddenly stopped. She held up a hand, and he froze. She knelt, examining the ground. He could see nothing but rock and dust. She rose and moved forward, her pace quickening. She had found a sign. An hour later, they found them, tucked into a deep fold in the earth, a place where a spring seeped from the rock, creating a small oasis of cottonwoods and willow. It was the remnant of her band, the old man he had seen in the canyon, 2 women, and the young boy. They were thin, their faces gaunt with fear and hunger. When they saw Connie, their stoic faces broke. The boy ran to her, burying his face in her waist. The old man, his face a map of dignified sorrow, simply nodded, his eyes bright with tears. And then they saw John. The boy's hand flew to the knife at his belt. The women recoiled, pulling their blankets tighter. The old man's face hardened, the brief flash of relief vanishing, replaced by a deep, cold suspicion. "Connie," the old man said, his voice a dry rasp. "What is this? You bring a Tebow here, a white man, after what they did?" Connie stepped away from the boy, placing herself between John and her family. She was no longer the desperate fugitive. She was a warrior among her people, and her voice was strong. "Father, this man, he is not with the soldiers. He fired on them. He saved us, in the canyon. He saved me again in the forest." The old man, Chief Tawapi, looked at John. His eyes were dark and piercing, and they held no gratitude. They held the accumulated pain and rage of a lifetime of betrayal. "He saved you from the wolves by bringing the lion. The soldiers hunt him, and he brings them here, to us." "They were already hunting us," Connie argued, her voice rising. "He is a renegade. They want to hang him. He is their enemy, as we are." "There is no such thing," Tawapi said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "A white man is a white man. His skin is his tribe. When the time comes, he will choose them. He is poison. He will destroy what is left of us." John stood silent, his hand resting near the butt of his revolver. He was an intruder. He was the source of their fear, the living symbol of their destruction. He could see the hatred in their eyes, and he could not blame them. He was a fool to have come. "I will not stay," John said, his voice rough. "I saw you to safety. I will go." "Go where?" Tawapi sneered. "On foot without water you will die in the desert, and the soldiers will find your body, and they will know we are near. You are a curse, white man. You have brought your death to our doorstep." A fierce argument erupted between Connie and her father, a rapid guttural flood of Comanche that John could not understand. But he understood the tones. Connie was defending him. She was gesturing, her hands sharp and angry, pointing back the way they had come, then at him. Tawapi stood like stone, his arms crossed, shaking his head. This was the core of it. John and Connie, they could not be apart. Their survival had depended on it, and they could not be together. Their worlds would not allow it. He saw the anguish on Connie's face. She was caught. Her loyalty to her father and her people pulling one way, and the debt she owed John, and the strange, powerful feeling that lay beneath it, pulling the other. She was betraying her father by defending the man who represented his enemies. John felt the old walls slide back into place. He was alone. He had always been alone. He turned to leave. "I will take my chances," he said. "No!" Connie's voice was sharp. She spoke to her father, one last pleading sentence. Tawapi looked at John, his face a mask of contempt. "You will stay," he commanded. "You will not leave. You will not be seen. You will be our prisoner. When we move, we will leave you. Until then, you are one more mouth to feed, one more danger to watch." It was a prison. He was trapped, not by soldiers, but by the very people he had saved. The next days were a quiet hell. John was given a small space at the edge of the tiny camp, near the horses. He was given scraps of food, a piece of tough, dried meat, a handful of bitter roots. The others, even the young boy, would not look at him. They spoke only in their own tongue, their voices low, their glances at him filled with suspicion. Only Connie spoke to him. She would bring him his meager share of food, her face set and expressionless. But her eyes told a different story. They were full of conflict, of anger, and of something else he was afraid to name. "You should not have come," she said to him one evening, as the sun set. "You did not give me much choice," he replied, chewing the tough meat. "My father is right," she said, her voice so low he had to strain to hear it. "You are a danger. Every time I look at you, I see the soldiers. I see my world burning." "And what do you see when you look at me, Connie?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Not at my skin. At me." She flinched, as if he had struck her. She looked at him, and for a second, the mask broke. He saw the fear, the confusion, the powerful, unwanted pull. This man, this enemy, had seen her, truly seen her. He had shared her fear, her exhaustion. He had given her his jacket. He had climbed a cliff in the dark for her. She was bound to him, and it terrified her. "I see a ghost," she whispered. "A man who does not belong anywhere, like me." Before he could answer, she turned and was gone, vanishing into the shadows of the cottonwoods. John wrestled with his own demons. He was a prisoner. He should be planning his escape, but his feet felt like lead. He could not leave. He told himself it was because he had no horse, no supplies. He told himself it was because he was repaying Tawapi's hospitality by not bringing the soldiers down on them. But he knew, in the part of his mind he kept locked away, that he was not staying because of Tawapi. He was staying because of Connie. The thought of walking away, of leaving her in this desolate, hunted place, was an ache he could not bear. His carefully built walls were crumbling, and he was terrified of what was left. The end came 3 days later. At dawn, the camp was just stirring, the air cold and still. The first warning was a horse's whinny, sharp and panicked. Then a shot. The soldiers. They came pouring down the shallow draw, led by the same sergeant whose face was now a mask of pure, vengeful triumph. He must have had trackers, Apache or otherwise, who had followed their desperate, impossible trail. "There they are," the sergeant roared. "The renegade and his squaw, no prisoners." The camp exploded into chaos. The women grabbed the children, scrambling for the rocks. Tawapi let out a massive war cry. Firing his old rifle, John did not hesitate. He grabbed his own Winchester, his status as prisoner forgotten. He was a soldier again. But this time, he knew which side he was on. He dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired. One of the lead soldiers grunted and fell from his saddle. John chambered another round, his movements quick and economical. He was fighting alongside Tawapi, protecting his retreat. He saw Connie. She was not running. She was fighting, firing a revolver. trying to give the women and her father time to escape. She was magnificent. She was all fire and courage. The sergeant saw them both. "Garrett!" he screamed, his voice raw with hatred. "You traitorous bastard! You will hang for this!" He spurred his horse toward John, his saber drawn. But two of his men, seeing Connie cut off from the others, veered toward her. She shot one, but the other was too fast. He rode her down, his horse slamming into her, knocking her to the ground. Before she could recover, he had dismounted, his rifle butt raised. "No!" John yelled, a sound of pure animal rage. He raised his rifle to shoot the man, but the sergeant was on him. The saber flashed, and John threw himself to the side, the blade cutting the air where his head had been. He lost his balance, falling, his rifle sliding from his grasp. He looked up and saw it all happening in a terrible, slow clarity. The soldier was dragging Connie to her feet, binding her wrists. The sergeant, his horse rearing, was turning for another pass at John. Tawapi and the others had vanished into the rocks. He was alone, disarmed, and Connie was captured. The soldier threw Connie over his saddle and began to retreat, back toward the main group. The sergeant smiled, a terrible, broken-toothed grin. He had his prize. He had the woman. He could kill John at his leisure. "It is over, renegade!" the sergeant spat, raising his saber. But John was not looking at him. He was looking at Connie. Her face was bloody, her hair unbound. But her eyes were fixed on him. They were not pleading. They were commanding. "Live." The sergeant's horse, spooked by the gunfire, shied suddenly. It was all the opening John needed. He rolled, grabbed his revolver from its holster, and fired from the ground. Not at the sergeant, but at his horse. The animal screamed and went down in a heap, trapping the sergeant's leg beneath it. John was on his feet in an instant. He did not spare the trapped sergeant a glance. He was running, scrambling up the rocks, disappearing into the same maze of canyons that had swallowed Tawapi. The soldiers fired at him, their bullets chipping the rock around him, but he was gone. He found a high crevice and lay flat, his breath tearing at his chest. He watched from his hiding place. The soldiers regrouped. The sergeant, freed from his horse, was limping, his face black with fury. They had their prisoner, Connie. They tied her more securely, put her on a horse, and began to ride out. The sergeant looked back at the rocks, his eyes scanning for John. "Let him go," the sergeant yelled, his voice echoing. "Let him rot. We have what matters. We will take her back to Fort Stanton. She will tell us where the others are, and if she does not, we will find a use for her." John watched them go. He was safe. He was free. He had survived. It was the survivor's play. He had done what he always did. He had saved himself. He watched until they were small figures in the distance. He saw Connie, her back straight, a prisoner, riding to a fate worse than death. And he knew, with a certainty that hollowed him out, that he was not free. He was more trapped than he had ever been in his life. The man who did not believe in love, the man who believed in no attachments, had just found the one thing he could not live without, and he had let her be taken. He could keep running. He could find a new territory, a new name. He could be a ghost, just as she had said. Or he could go after her. It was not a decision. It was an acknowledgement. There was no choice to be made. His life, the one he had been living, was over. He checked his revolver. He had 4 bullets left. He had no horse, no food, no water. He was one man against an army patrol. It was not a mission. It was suicide. He stood up, his face a mask of cold, settled purpose. He began to walk, following the trail of dust left by the soldiers, his step steady and relentless. He was going to get her back, or he was going to die trying. He walked for hours. The sun was a hammer, the land an anvil. His thirst became a living thing, a creature with claws in his throat. He had 4 bullets in his revolver and none for his rifle. which he had lost in the fall. He had only the revolver and his knife. He followed the tracks, a line of churned dust and horse droppings, a clear scar on the prairie. He was a fool. He was a dead man. And he did not care. The part of him that calculated odds, the part that had kept him alive for so long, was silent. All that spoke was a single, cold command. Find her. Night fell, and he kept walking. The air turned cold, but he did not feel it. He moved with a steady, relentless rhythm, his mind fixed on a single point. He was a machine made of rage and purpose. He knew the patrol would not ride all night. They were confident. They had their prisoner. They would camp. Just after midnight, he saw the faint, distant glow of campfires. He slowed his pace, leaving the trail and moving into the rocks and shadows that flanked it. He moved like a shadow himself, his ruined boots making almost no sound on the stones. It took him another hour to get close, to circle the camp, to find a high perch in a jumble of boulders that overlooked the soldiers. There were 10 of them, the ones who had survived the fight at Tawapi's camp. They had posted 2 guards, but they were lazy. They stood near the fire, drinking coffee, their voices and laughter carrying clearly on the still night air. Their horses were picketed in a loose line, and he saw her. Connie was tied to the wheel of a supply wagon, her hands bound in front of her. Her head was bowed, her hair a curtain that hid her face, even from a distance. He could see the rigid set of her shoulders. She was not broken. The sight of her, a captive, a trophy, sent a fresh wave of cold fury through him. The sergeant, his leg propped up on a saddle, was drinking from a flask. He laughed at something one of his men said, then glanced at Connie and said something else. The other men laughed louder. John lay on the cold rock, his body aching, his throat burning. He watched. He waited. He needed horses and he needed a diversion. He was one man with 4 bullets against 10 armed soldiers. The odds were impossible, but the man who had left the war, the man who believed in nothing, was gone. The soldier remained, and the soldier knew one thing: you do not leave your own behind. He waited for the dead time, the hour just before dawn when the body is at its lowest, when the guards are fighting sleep, when the world is at its darkest. The moon had set. The fires were low embers. One of the guards had sat down, his back against a rock. The other was walking a slow, predictable beat. John slipped out of the boulders and crept toward the horse line. He moved on his belly, a snake in the dust. It took him 20 minutes to cover 50 yards. He reached the horses. They smelled him, and one of them snorted, tossing its head. The walking guard paused, peering into the darkness. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, but he did not investigate. John pulled his knife. He chose 2 horses at the end of the line, strong-looking bays. He cut their picket ropes. Then he moved down the line, cutting every other rope, his hand moving fast and silent. He slapped one of the freed horses hard on the rump. The animal yelled, a high-pitched squeal of surprise, and bolted. The other freed horses suddenly untied, scattered, running through the camp. The camp exploded. Men yelled, emerging from their bedrolls, grabbing for rifles. The guards were shouting, running after the horses. In that first moment of pure chaos, John was moving. He ran, low and fast, not toward the horses he had chosen, but straight for the wagon. Connie's head had snapped up at the first sound. Her eyes, wide and wild, found him in the darkness. She did not make a sound. He reached her, his knife flashing, cutting the ropes that held her wrists. "The horses!" he hissed, grabbing her arm. "The 2 bays, on the end." He did not wait to see if she followed. He ran for the bays, pulling his revolver. A soldier, half-dressed, stumbled out of a tent in front of him. The man's eyes went wide. He raised his rifle. John shot him. The sound of the revolver was shockingly loud. He did not look to see the man fall. He had 3 bullets left. He reached the horses. Connie was right behind him. She moved like a deer, vaulting onto the bare back of one of the bays. John swung onto the other. "Ride!" he yelled. and kicked the horse into a gallop. "They are getting away," he heard the sergeant scream, his voice a compound of rage and pain. "After them, shoot them!" Rifle fire cracked behind them, bullets whining past their ears in the dark. John leaned low over the horse's neck, pushing it to its limit. They burst out of the camp and into the open prairie. A wild, desperate race against the coming dawn. They were free. They rode for 2 hours, the sky turning from black to gray, the horse's breath pluming in the cold air. John did not look back, but he listened. He did not hear a pursuit. The soldiers would be rounding up their scattered mounts. They had bought themselves time. "We have to stop," Connie said, her voice raw. She was riding beside him, her hair flying free. "The horses, they cannot keep this pace." He slowed to a trot, then a walk. The horses were lathered, their sides heaving. They were in a wide, shallow basin, the land rising up around them to a series of low hills. The gray light of morning revealed a desolate, empty landscape. "Where are we?" he asked. She pointed north. "The Cimarron. Maybe half a day. If we had water, we have none." She was still wearing his jacket. It was torn and dirty, but she had not taken it off. He was about to answer when she held up her hand, her body going utterly still. "Listen." John listened. At first, he heard nothing but the wind and the panting of the horses. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound. Hoofbeats, many of them, but not from behind, from the hills in front of them. "Soldiers," he whispered. "No," she said, her face pale beneath the grime. "Kiowa," as if summoned by her word. A line of riders appeared on the crest of the hill, at least 30 of them. They were in full war paint, their lances and rifles stark against the gray sky. They were a hunting party, and they had found their prey. The Kiowa let out a single, ululating cry and charged, their ponies flowing down the hillside like a flood. "This way!" Connie screamed, yanking her horse's head around, spurring it back the way they had come. John was beside her. They were riding for their lives. Again, but their horses were tired, and the Kiowas were fresh. They were closing the gap, arrows beginning to arc high and fall around them. And then, from behind them, came the sound of a bugle. John looked back. On the rise they had just crossed, the cavalry patrol appeared. The sergeant was at their head, his face a mask of triumph. He had followed them. He had caught them. They were trapped. The Kiowa were in front, the soldiers behind. The vise had closed. The Kiowa, seeing the soldiers, let out a whoop of pure, bloodthirsty joy. Their old enemies, the bluecoats, delivered to them in the open. They split their charge, half continuing for John and Connie, the other half wheeling to meet the cavalry. The sergeant, seeing the war party, did not hesitate. "Charge!" he roared. The world dissolved into a nightmare of screams, gunfire, and pounding hooves. John and Connie were caught in the middle, a Kiowa warrior. His face painted a terrible mask of yellow and black, bore down on John, his lance leveled. John fired his second-to-last bullet. The warrior's eyes widened in surprise as he toppled from his pony. A soldier, his face young and terrified, rode past, his revolver blazing at the Kiowa. He saw John, recognized him as a white man, and hesitated. That hesitation cost him his life. A Kiowa arrow took him in the throat, and he fell, grasping at the feathered shaft. John felt a sickening lurch. He was fighting, but who was he fighting? The Kiowa, the army. He saw Connie, her borrowed horse stumbling. A Kiowa had her reins. John rode at him, smashing the empty revolver into the man's face. He grabbed her reins and pulled her horse clear. The fight was a swirling, confused melee. There were no battle lines, just individual duels. John saw the sergeant, his saber bloody, fighting back-to-back with one of his own troopers against 3 Kiowa. It was a fight for survival. Alliances were meaningless. "The rocks!" John yelled at Connie, pointing to a small, rocky outcrop in the middle of the basin. "Our only chance." He pulled her horse, forcing it toward the small island of stone. They reached it, leaping from the horses, and scrambled behind the boulders. The horses, terrified, ran off. They were on foot, again. The battle raged around them, a chaotic circle of death. John had one bullet left. Connie had the knife from her boot. They crouched behind the rock, breathing hard. "This is a good day to die," she said, her voice strangely calm. She was looking at him, not at the fight. "Not yet," he said, his voice a growl. He was peering over the rock, watching. The battle was turning. The Kiowa were too many. The soldiers were being cut down, one by one. He saw the sergeant. His last trooper had fallen. He was alone, his horse wounded, his saber broken. A Kiowa warrior, who seemed to be their leader, was riding him down. The sergeant lifted his empty revolver, a final, defiant gesture. The Kiowa's lance took him in the chest, lifting him clear of the saddle. The fight was over. The Kiowa had won. The remaining soldiers, only 2 or 3, were fleeing, pursued by a handful of warriors. The rest of the war party, victorious, was finishing the wounded and gathering scalps. And then they turned their attention to the rocks. The war leader, the one who had killed the sergeant, rode forward. He stopped about 30 yards away. He looked at John, a white man. He looked at Connie, a Comanche woman, his people's traditional enemies. "Come out," the warrior said, in broken English. "You fight brave, for a white man. We mean you no harm." John called out, his hand on his last bullet. "We were running from the soldiers, just like you were fighting them." "You are Tabo," the warrior said, gesturing at John. "She is Comanche. Why are you together? You are his prisoner," he asked Connie. Connie stood up, her head high. She was still wearing John's jacket. "He is not my captor," she said in her own tongue, a language the Kiowa would understand. "He is he fights with me." The Kiowa leader laughed. "A white man fights with a Comanche, the snake lies with the rabbit. I have seen everything now." "Let us go," Connie said, her voice strong. "We have no fight with you. We are hunted. Let us go, and we will be gone from your lands." The leader considered this. He looked at the bodies of the soldiers, then at John and Connie. He looked at the Kiowa John had shot. "He killed our brother," the leader said, his voice hardening. "He was fighting for his life," Connie said, "as we all were." The leader raised his lance. "The white man dies. The woman, she will be a slave for the wife of the man he killed." John stood up, moving in front of Connie. He raised his revolver, aiming it steady at the leader's chest. "You will have to come and get us," he said, his voice flat. "One of us will die. Maybe you, maybe me, but she is not going to be your slave." The Kiowa warriors tensed, lifting their own rifles. It was a standoff. Connie looked at John. He was standing in front of her, protecting her, a man with one bullet, challenging 30 warriors for her. The knot in her stomach, the one of fear and confusion and betrayal, tightened into something else, something sharp and hot and undeniable. He was willing to die for her, this man who believed in nothing. She stepped out from behind him, to stand beside him. She held her knife. "If he dies," she said to the Kiowa, her voice ringing in the silence, "I die, and my spirit will hunt you. My father is Tawapi, chief of the Quahati Comanche. Kill us, and you bring a war you cannot win." The Kiowa leader's eyes narrowed. The name Tawapi carried weight. The Quahati were fierce. This was no longer a simple skirmish. It was a political incident. He looked at the setting sun, at his weary men, at the rich prize of the soldiers' horses and rifles. He looked at the 2 defiant figures, a white man and a Comanche woman, standing together against the world. He grunted, a sound of disgust. "You are not worth a war, Comanche woman. Take your white dog. Go!" He wheeled his horse. "We have the bluecoats' scalps. It is enough. Let them go. Let them tell the desert of Kiowa mercy." He and his war party began to gather the soldiers' weapons and their own dead. They did not look at John and Connie again. John and Connie stood, frozen, as the Kiowa rode away, their new horses in tow. The silence that fell was profound, broken only by the wind and the groans of a single, dying soldier. They were alone, on foot, without food, without water, in a battlefield littered with the dead. They were surrounded by enemies. The army would send more men. The Kiowa could change their minds. The Apaches were still in these hills, and their own people, the Comanche, were scattered and lost. John finally lowered his revolver, his hand shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden, violent release of tension. He looked at Connie. She was looking at him, her eyes unreadable. Their societal values, the rules they had lived by, had been burned away in the fire of the last few days. He was a traitor. She was consorting with the enemy. He, a white man, had fought and killed other white men to save her. She, a Comanche, had stood with him against the Kiowa. The world was upside down. The lines were gone. "John," she said, the first time she had used his name. Her voice was soft. He looked at her. "You have one bullet left," she said, pointing to the revolver. "I know," he said. "We will not make it," she said, "not on foot." He did not answer. He just looked at her. The war was over. The fight for survival had just begun. And in this empty, brutal land, the only person he could trust, the only person he did trust, was the woman standing in front of him. His enemy, his ally, his something. He did not have a word for it, but he knew, as he looked at her, that he would use that last bullet on himself before he let anyone take her again. The silence of the battlefield was a heavy, suffocating thing. The wind had died, and the only sound was the distant, ragged cough of the lone dying soldier. John and Connie stood, frozen. In the middle of the carnage, they were alive. They were alone. "We have to move," John said. His voice was a rasp, torn by thirst and the grit of the battle. "Before those Kiowa change their minds, or before the buzzards start." Connie nodded, her eyes wide and dark, still fixed on the spot where the Kiowa war party had disappeared. She was in shock, but the warrior in her was not broken. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and her gaze became sharp, practical. "There is nothing to the west but rock. We need water, and horses." "There are no horses left for us," John said. He gestured to the dead. "But there might be water, and ammunition." They moved, not as a man and a woman, but as two predators, two survivors, picking through the wreckage. John went to the dead sergeant first. He felt no remorse, no lingering kinship. He was just a body, a collection of resources. He found a canteen. He shook it. It was full. He strapped it over his own shoulder. The sergeant's revolver was empty, but his cartridge belt was half full. John took that, too, buckling it over his own. He now had one bullet in his revolver and a rifle he had picked up from a dead trooper. He had ammunition. He was armed. Connie had moved to the Kiowa warrior John had shot. She knelt beside him without ceremony, taking his water skin, which was also partially full. She found a leather pouch tied to his belt. She opened it. Pemmican, dried meat, berries, and fat. It was a dense, nourishing, traveler's food. She slung the water skin over her shoulder and tucked the pemmican into the pocket of the canvas jacket she still wore. His jacket. They looked at each other over the bodies. The spoils of survival divided between them. They had water for perhaps 2 days, food for 3, and a small arsenal. "West," John said, pointing to the jagged line of mountains that marked the horizon. "We get into the high country. We can hide there. We can lose them. They will follow," Connie said. The soldiers. They will find this. They will send more. They will not stop hunting you. And now, me. Then we will have to be better at hiding than they are at hunting, he said. They began to walk. The sun climbed, a merciless white eye. The battlefield fell away behind them, a small, dark stain on the immense prairie. They walked in silence, putting distance between themselves and that place of death. The shared work of scavenging, the unspoken agreement, had forged a new bond. They were no longer just allies of circumstance. They were partners. They walked all day. The prairie gave way to broken ground, then to the first low, rising foothills. The land was red rock and thorny brush. They spoke only when necessary. "We rest here," he would say, pointing to a sliver of shade. "We must cross this ridge before dark," she would counter, and he would nod, and they would keep walking. They shared the water, his canteen, then her water skin. They shared the pemmican, sitting back to back, chewing the tough, rich food as they watched the trail behind them. The intimacy was practical, born of necessity, but it was there, a physical thing between them. He was aware of the way she moved, the economy of her motion, the way she read the ground, the tilt of her head as she listened to the wind. She was aware of his endurance, the steady, relentless pace he set, the way his eyes, blue and cold, missed nothing, constantly scanning, assessing, planning. That night, they found shelter in a dry wash, a shallow scar in the earth that offered little protection but was better than the open. The air grew cold quickly. "I will take the first watch," John said, seating himself on the lip of the wash, the rifle across his knees. "We will share the watch," Connie replied, her voice sharp. She would not be treated as a weakness. "I am not a child." "I know what you are," he said, his voice quiet. He did not look at her. "You are the reason I am still breathing, but you are tired. Sleep. I will wake you." She hesitated, her pride warring with the bone-deep weariness that saturated her body. She had not slept, not truly, in days. She watched him for a moment, the set of his shoulders, the way he held the rifle. He was a guardian. He was her guardian. The thought was terrifying. She nodded, a curt, small motion, and wrapped his jacket tighter around herself. She lay down on the cold sand and, to her own surprise, she slept. John watched her sleep. The moonlight was faint, but it was enough. It softened the hard lines of her face, the warrior's edge. He saw the exhaustion, the bruising, the dried blood in her hair. He felt a powerful, protective urge that was so intense it was a physical ache in his chest. This was the weakness he had feared. This was the attachment that got men killed. And it was here, fully formed, and he was helpless against it. He looked away from her, back at the empty, hostile darkness, and tightened his grip on the rifle. They walked for 2 more days. The land grew steeper, the mountains looming over them, a fortress of granite and pine. Connie's moccasins, not made for this kind of travel, were shredded. John saw her wince as she stepped on a sharp rock, but her pace never faltered. He saw a tiny smear of blood on the stone she had left. He stopped, his hand on her arm. "Wait!" She turned, her eyes flashing, suspicious of any halt. He unslung his pack, which held the meager supplies, and sat down. He pulled his knife and, to her surprise, began cutting a long strip of cloth from the bottom of his own shirt. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Your feet," he said, his voice flat, not looking up. "You are bleeding. You cannot walk. We die. It is simple." He held out the strips of cloth. "You can do it, or I will." Connie stared at him, her throat tight. This man, this renegade, this Tebow, was tearing his own clothes to bind her feet. She sat down, her back to him, and slowly, her hands shaking with a strange new emotion, she lifted her foot. He knelt in front of her, It felt, somehow, more intimate than if he had kissed her. He took her foot in his hand. His hand was huge, scarred, and surprisingly gentle. Her foot was small, brown, and bloody. He cleaned the cuts with the last of the water from his canteen, a gesture of sacrifice that made her want to weep. He wrapped the cloth around her moccasins, creating a thicker, padded sole. He did the other foot, his movements efficient, impersonal, but his touch burned her skin. She watched the top of his head, the way his dark hair was threaded with gray. He was not a devil. He was not a savior. He was just a man who was tying his fate to hers with every step, with every shared breath, with every strip of cloth. He finished and stood up, shouldering the pack. "We can make the ridge by nightfall," he said, his voice gruff, as if ashamed of the tenderness. They climbed. They were in the mountains now. The pursuit had not come. They had allowed themselves a small, fragile sliver of hope. Perhaps they had been forgotten. Perhaps they were free. The hope died on the afternoon of the fourth day. Connie, who was walking point, dropped to the ground, pulling John down with her in one swift motion. "Dust," she whispered, her lips against his ear. He crawled beside her to the edge of the ridge. He looked down, into the long valley they had just crossed. A column of blue, cavalry, at least 15 of them. They were moving fast, and they were following their trail. "They have a tracker," John said, his voice grim. "He is good." "They will be at the base of this ridge in an hour," Connie said. Her voice was steady. The fear was gone, replaced by the cold focus of the hunted. "We cannot outrun them. Not on foot, not uphill." "We need a place to fight," John said, his eyes scanning the rock face above them. "A place they cannot charge." "There," she said, pointing. It was a shadow, a dark slash in the granite about 200 yards up a steep, scree-covered slope. It could be a cave. It was their only chance. They ran, scrambling up the loose rock, their lungs on fire, their legs screaming. John was half carrying her, his arm around her waist, hauling her. The cave was real. It was a narrow opening, leading into a fissure in the mountain. It was not deep, perhaps 30 feet, but it was defensible. They collapsed in the blackness at the back of it, their breath tearing in and out of their chests. They heard the soldiers arrive below. The jingle of harness, the curses of men, the orders of an officer. "Garrett," a voice echoed up the slope. It was a new voice, crisp and educated. "We know you are in there. Sergeant Miles tracked you from the battlefield. You are charged with treason, desertion, and the murder of United States soldiers. Come out now. We will give you a fair trial before we hang you." John lay flat, his rifle resting on a low rock at the mouth of the cave. He did not answer. "Send out the woman," the officer yelled. "We have no quarrel with her. Send her out, and we will let her go free." Connie let out a small, bitter laugh. "He lies well." "They all do," John whispered. They waited. The sun began to set, filling the valley with long, purple shadows. The soldiers were not stupid. They would not attack an unknown, fortified position in the dying light. They heard them making camp. They were settling in for a siege. Darkness fell, absolute and cold. The cave was a pocket of ink. John and Connie sat pressed together, their shoulders touching, for warmth, for comfort. They were trapped. They had a rifle, a revolver, and maybe 30 rounds. They had no food. They had one sip of water left, which John pressed into her hand. She drank it. "They will come at dawn," John said. His voice was a low vibration in the dark, a sound so intimate it seemed to bypass her ears and go straight into her skin. "I know," she whispered. Her body was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor from cold and exhaustion. We can fight," he said, his own voice unsteady. "We can take a few of them." "We will die here, John," she said, the words simple, a statement of fact. Yes. She turned her head. He could not see her, but he felt the shift. He felt her breath, warm and close. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice so small it seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. "Me too," he said. The admission was a stone, pulled from the deepest part of him. She found his hand in the blackness. Her fingers were ice cold, but they laced with his, a desperate, anchoring grip. He put his free arm around her, pulling her close against his side, trying to share his own dwindling warmth. She did not resist. She leaned into him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. He held her, his chin resting on the top of her head. He could feel her heart, a rapid, frantic beat against his ribs. "So cold," she breathed, her teeth chattering. They sat like that for a long time, two living, breathing, terrified people in a tomb. The world was gone. There was only the darkness, the cold, and the enemy waiting outside. Connie moved, pulling away slightly. John's arm tightened, a panicked, involuntary clench. "Do not," he whispered. I cannot get warm," she said. He heard the fumbling of cloth, the rasp of the canvas jacket as she pulled it off. Then, the softer sound of her buckskin tunic. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice thick. "My grandmother, she said, in the winter, if a child is freezing, you must use your own skin." She was shedding her layers. She was down to the thin slip she wore beneath. She turned and pressed herself against him, her back to his chest, fitting herself into his embrace. The shock of her bare skin against his shirt, and then against the skin of his own chest where his shirt was torn, was like a brand. It seared him. John's breath hitched. His fingers, the scarred, rough fingers of a soldier, were shaking. He pulled the canvas jacket and her tunic over both of them, a makeshift blanket. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her so close he could feel every line of her, every shiver. She was small and soft and warm, and she was fitting herself to him, seeking his heat. He was lost, the fortress he had built around himself, the walls he had maintained for 15 years. They did not just crumble, they evaporated. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her, smoke and pine and the salt of her skin. He was trembling, a deep, racking shudder that came from his soul. His hand moved, as if of its own accord, from her waist, up her side, to her shoulder. Her skin was like silk over steel. He felt her go tense, then, with a sigh, relax, leaning her head back against his collarbone. He lowered his head, his lips finding the place just below her ear, the frantic pulse of her life. He kissed her, not a kiss of passion, but of desperation, a kiss of comfort, a kiss that said, "We are here, we are alive, right now, in this moment." She made a sound, a low keen in her throat, and twisted in his arms. She was facing him now, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. He could not see her, but he felt her. He felt her breath on his mouth. "John," she whispered, and it was a prayer. He found her lips. It was a collision in the dark. It was salt and thirst and desperation. It was the end of the world. It was all the things they could not say, all the fear, all the anger, all the impossible, forbidden longing of the past days, exploding in the hopeless dark. Her mouth was soft, and she kissed him back with a fierce, matching hunger. His arms crushed her to him, his hand in her hair, hers at the back of his neck, pulling him down. This was not love as he had understood it. It was not soft or kind. It was brutal. It was necessary. It was two people, stripped of everything, finding the only anchor left in the universe. She broke the kiss, her forehead resting against his, both of them breathing as if they had run 1,000 miles. "We die at dawn," she breathed, her voice a sob. "Then we die at dawn," he whispered back, his voice raw. "But we are alive tonight." He held her face in his hands, finding her mouth again. He felt her tears, hot and wet, on his thumbs. He kissed them away. He kissed her eyelids, her cheeks, her throat, and she held on to him, her fingers digging into his back, as if he were the only solid thing in a falling world. She pulled back, her lips moving, brushing against his ear. He felt the words, a hot vibration that shook him to his core. "God help me," she whispered, her voice a broken surrender. "I cannot resist." He held her, pulling the jacket over them, shielding her from the cold, from the world, from the death that waited. He buried his face in her hair, and in the absolute, final darkness, they found their comfort. The consequences would come with the sun, but the night was theirs. The first light was a cold, cruel gray, filtering into the mouth of the cave. It was the color of ash, the color of an ending, the warmth of the night, the desperate, impossible comfort they had found in each other's arms. Evaporated, leaving a raw, aching chill. They were strangers again, and they were going to die. John was the first to move. His body was a single, unified scream of protest. Every muscle was stiff, every joint on fire. He untangled himself from Connie, his movements slow, clumsy. He felt her flinch at the loss of his heat. They did not look at each other. The intimacy of the dark was too fragile, too shaming, to be examined in this unforgiving light. It had been a betrayal of their people, of their pasts, and a surrender to a feeling that had no name and no future. Wordlessly, they dressed. Connie pulled on her thin buckskins, her movements stiff. She reached for his jacket, which they had used as a blanket. Her hand hesitated. It was his. It smelled of him. It was the symbol of her weakness. She put it on. She was cold. John checked his rifle. Then the revolver. He methodically reloaded the empty chamber from the sergeant's cartridge belt. He now had a full 6 rounds in his revolver and perhaps 2 dozen for the rifle. It was not enough. "They will come up the slope," he said, his voice a dead monotone. He took his position at one side of the cave mouth, the rifle resting on the rock. "I will take the other side," Connie said. She picked up the dead soldier's revolver, which John had given her. She checked it. It was loaded. They waited. The sun had not yet breached the peaks, but the valley below was awash in a clear, shadowless light. They could see the soldiers, 15 of them, moving into position. They were not fools. They were spreading out, a loose skirmish line at the base of the scree slope, using the boulders as cover. "Garrett!" The officer's voice was sharp, impatient. "Last chance. Come out with your hands high. We are coming in." John did not answer. He lined up his sights on a patch of blue uniform visible behind a distant rock. "You are a fool, Garrett!" the officer screamed, his voice echoing. "You are one man. You are dying for a savage." John's finger tightened on the trigger. The man he was aiming at moved, his head exposed for just a second. John fired. The shot was a flat crack, shockingly loud in the stillness. The blue uniform jerked and then was still. "He fired," a soldier yelled. "The bastard fired!" "Advance," the officer roared. "Fire it will smoke him out." The battle began. The soldiers moved from rock to rock, climbing the slope, their rifles flashing. Bullets sparked and whined off the mouth of the cave, sending chips of granite stinging into John's face. He and Connie fired back, but they were not firing at a line. They were firing at ghosts, at brief movements, at puffs of smoke. "They are too many," Connie said, her voice tight. She had fired twice, at targets she could not be sure she had hit. "Make them pay for the ground." John grunted. He fired again. A man screamed, a high, thin sound, and clutched his leg, sliding back down the rocks. "That is 2." But they were still coming. They were halfway up the slope, and they were carrying something. A group of 3 men, protected by the others covering fire, was moving up a gully to their left, dragging a large bundle of dry brush. "Fire!" "John!" Connie screamed, pointing. "The gully!" John shifted his aim, but the men were deep in the rocks, protected. He fired, the bullet ricocheting with a useless scream. The officer was smart. They were going to be smoked out or burned alive. "They are at the mouth," Connie yelled. The soldiers with the brush were now just below the lip of the cave, out of their line of sight. They heard the scrape of a match, and then the sickening whoosh as the bundle caught fire. An acrid, choking smoke began to pour into the cave. "They are trying to burn us," John gasped, his eyes already watering. The smoke was thick, oily. "We cannot stay." Connie choked, her hand over her mouth. "We go out. We die in the light." "Not yet." John grabbed the water skin, the one that had belonged to the Kiowa. It was empty, but it was leather. "Cover me." He ran, crouching, to the back of the cave, into the deepest, thickest part of the smoke. He could not breathe. He began to beat at the burning brush with the flat of the water skin. It was a pathetic, useless gesture. The fire was too big. Connie fired twice, rapid shots, forcing the soldiers outside to keep their heads down. The smoke was a living thing, a hot, clawing monster. John stumbled back, his lungs on fire. "It is no good," he wheezed. "We have to go. We run right toward the high rocks. It is our only chance." "They will cut us down," she said, but she was moving beside him, her face a mask of tears and soot. "We go together," he said. He grabbed her hand. Her hand, which had gripped his in the dark, was now slick with sweat. "Now." They burst from the smoke, two wraith-like figures, choking and firing. They ran, not down the slope, but sideways, toward a jumble of higher boulders. The morning air was a painful, glorious shock to their lungs. The soldiers, startled by their sudden appearance, yelled in surprise. A volley of shots exploded around them. Connie screamed. A bullet had torn through the flesh of her thigh, a long, bloody graze. She stumbled, falling to her knees. John whirled, pulling her up. He fired his revolver into the advancing soldiers. A mad, desperate covering fire. He was dragging her, his arm around her waist, her arm over his shoulder. They were almost to the rocks. A soldier, his face young and hard, came from nowhere, leaping from behind a boulder. He did not fire. He lunged, his rifle held like a club. He swung it at John's head. John saw it coming. He tried to duck, but he was too slow, encumbered by Connie. The rifle butt connected with the side of his skull with a wet, heavy crack. The world went white, then black. He fell, his grip on Connie loosening. He was on his knees, the rocks spinning around him. He could hear, but the sounds were distant, watery. He heard Connie scream his name. He saw, as if through a tunnel, two soldiers grabbing her, wrestling her to the ground, binding her wrists. He tried to stand. His legs would not obey. He tried to raise his revolver. It was gone, fallen from his numb hand. A boot kicked him, hard, in the ribs, sending him sprawling onto his back. He looked up. The officer was standing over him, his face cold and triumphant. He pressed the muzzle of his own revolver against John's forehead. The metal was cold. "It is over. Garrett," the officer said, his voice calm. "You chose the wrong side. Any last words? Traitor?" John said nothing. He was not looking at the officer. He was looking past him, at Connie. She was on her feet, held between two soldiers. Her face was bloody, her leg was bleeding, but her eyes were fixed on him. They were full of a fire and a fury that burned away all his pain. He had failed her. He had let her be captured. Again. This was it, the end of the line. He could die. It would be easy. The pain would stop. The running would be over. He saw the officer's finger tighten on the trigger. A sound split the air. It was not a rifle shot. It was a cry, a high, ululating, terrifying cry that seemed to come from all directions at once. A war cry. The officer's head snapped up. his eyes wide with disbelief. "What in God's name?" John saw them, on the ridge above, the one they had been fighting toward. A line of riders. Not Kiowa, not Apache, Comanche. They were led by a single, massive figure, Tawapi. He was magnificent, his face painted for war, his war bonnet trailing in the wind. He was at the head of at least 40 warriors. They had found the trail. They had come. "Comanche," a soldier yelled, his voice breaking in panic. "We are surrounded." The officer, to his credit, did not panic. He moved, fast. "To the rocks!" he bellowed, dragging his attention from John. "Form a perimeter. They are on foot. Hold the high ground." He had forgotten John. He ran to his men, who were scrambling for cover. Their attack on the cave forgotten. Their world reduced to this new, terrible threat. The soldiers holding Connie shoved her to the ground behind a large rock and joined the skirmish line. The world exploded. The Comanche charged, not on horseback, but on foot, flowing down the mountainside like a silent, deadly river, using every rock, every bush, for cover. They were not charging into the open. They were hunting. John was still on the ground. His head was a universe of pain, but the fog was clearing. He was alive. He was forgotten. And Connie, he saw her. She was 20 yards away, behind the soldiers' new defensive line. She was on the ground, her hands still bound. She was trying to wriggle toward a small cleft in the rock. This was the choice, the one he had been running from his whole life. He was a ghost. He was in the perfect position. The soldiers had their backs to him. He could slip away. He could crawl back into the cave, find a fissure, and disappear. He could let them fight. Let the Comanche and the soldiers destroy each other. He could be free. He could have the life he always wanted. A life with no attachments, no loyalties, no one to answer to. He could be the man who walked away. He looked at Connie. She was looking at him, her eyes pleading. He remembered the night. He remembered her voice. "God help me, I cannot resist." He remembered her skin, her breath, her fear. He remembered his own terror, not of dying, but of losing her. What was that freedom? It was an empty, cold, desolate word. It was the word for being alone. He had been running his whole life, and he had finally run into the one thing he could not run from. His love for her was not a weakness. It was the only real, solid thing he had ever known. It was his compass. It was his tribe. He saw his revolver, lying on the rocks a few feet away. He crawled to it. His hand closed around the grip. He heard the battle raging, the shouts of the officer, the crack of rifles, the sharp, whistling cries of the Comanche. He was not a white man. He was not a soldier. He was not a renegade. He was hers. He staggered to his feet. He felt the blood running from the wound in his head, hot and sticky, into his eye. He wiped it away. He was behind the line of soldiers. They were all facing outward, firing at the advancing Comanche. John Garrett, the man who did not believe in love, made his choice. He would not be free. He would be bound. He would be bound to her. He raised his revolver. He took aim, not at the officer, but at the soldier closest to Connie. He squeezed the trigger. The soldier grunted, spun around, his eyes wide with shock to see a dead man standing behind him, and fell. The other soldiers heard. They turned, but it was too late. John was in their midst, his revolver barking, the rifle he had snatched from the fallen man in his other hand. He was fighting. He was fighting the army. He was fighting for the Comanche. The officer saw him, his face a mask of pure disbelief. "Garrett!" he screamed. John did not pause. He was not fighting for Tawapi. He was not fighting for the tribe. He was fighting his way to Connie. The fate of the battle, the fate of her people. It all balanced on this one. Simple, personal act. He had to get to her. The battle for their future was the battle for her. Right now. He clubbed a soldier, kicked another, and dived behind the rock where she lay, cutting her bonds with his knife as the bullets of his own people snapped over his head. His knife sliced through the rawhide ropes as a bullet sang off the rock above their heads, close enough to send stone chips stinging his face. Connie was free. She rubbed her wrists, her eyes wild and dark, fixed on his face. The wound on her leg was dark with blood, but she ignored it. The world had shrunk to this single, terrible point in time. "Here," he gasped, shoving the dead soldier's revolver into her hand. "Can you use it?" She did not answer. She simply took it, her grip firm, and turned, pressing her back against the same rock as his. They were a single, small island in a sea of chaos. "You came back," she breathed. It was not a question. It was not gratitude. It was a statement of stunned, terrible disbelief. "Get ready," he said, his voice a low growl. He risked a look over the rock. The soldiers were trapped. Tawapi's warriors were a flowing, deadly tide from above, while John and Connie, now armed, were a cancer in their rear. The officer was screaming orders, but it was too late. The skirmish line had disintegrated into a series of desperate, individual fights. "Garrett!" The officer's voice was a raw shriek of hatred. He had seen. He understood the betrayal. "You will die for this. You will die by my hand." He and two of his men, abandoning the fight against the Comanche, turned and charged their position. This was the final moment. The war, the running, the doubt. It all came down to this. John stood. He was no longer the ghost. He was no longer the man running from his past. He was a soldier, standing his ground, protecting his own, and Connie was his. He met the charge. He shot the first man in the chest. The soldier stumbled, his eyes wide, and fell. The second man fired, his bullet tearing a hot line of pain along John's ribs. John ignored it. He was moving, his borrowed rifle clubbed in his hands, and he swung it, a brutal, horizontal arc that connected with the man's jaw. The soldier crumpled, and then the officer was on him. He was a big man, his face purple with rage, his saber in his hand. He had lost his cap, and his blonde hair was matted with sweat. "Traitor!" he screamed, and lunged. John did not have time to raise his rifle. He dropped it, diving forward, under the saber's whistling cut. He drove his shoulder into the officer's stomach, a hard, desperate tackle. The two men went down, rolling in the scree and the blood. John's head wound exploded in a fresh wave of agony. The world turned red. He felt the officer's hands at his throat, thumbs pressing, cutting off his air. He was strong. John was weaker, his body battered, his head spinning. He was losing. He heard a shot, right beside his ear. The officer's body went rigid. The hands at his throat spasmed, then loosened. The officer's eyes, wide with a final, shocked surprise, stared at the sky. He collapsed, a dead weight, on top of John. John pushed the body off, gasping, sucking in the clean, cold mountain air. He looked up. Connie was standing over him. The revolver was in her hand, smoke curling from the barrel. She had saved him. Her face was a mask of cold, deadly focus. She had a warrior's heart. "Get up," she said, her voice sharp. "The fight is not over." She was right. The battle was still raging, but the tide had turned. The soldiers, leaderless, their rear compromised, were being overwhelmed. Tawapi's warriors were moving with a terrible, silent efficiency. It was no longer a battle. It was a mopping-up operation. John found his rifle. He and Connie moved from rock to rock, not as pursuers, but as survivors. The fight was being won by the Comanche. He saw Tawapi, a giant, his war club rising and falling. He was a force of nature. The last soldier, a young man, no older than the boy John had seen in the Box Canyon, threw down his rifle and raised his hands. "I surrender," he cried. "Mercy." A Comanche warrior, his face painted in death's head white, did not slow, His tomahawk moved in a blur. The soldier's plea was cut short. There was no mercy here. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Silence fell. It was a heavy, complete silence, broken only by the wind whistling over the ridge and the low, agonizing groans of the wounded. The slope was covered with bodies, blue and brown, scattered like a careless giant's discarded toys. John stood, his rifle hanging from his hand. His chest was heaving. He was covered in his own blood, and the blood of the officer. His head felt like it was going to split open. His ribs were afire, but he was alive. Connie limped to his side. She did not touch him. She just stood there, her body tense, her eyes scanning the battlefield. Her people were victorious. She had survived, but she, too, was looking at the cost. John looked at the dead, the officer, the men he had shot, the young soldier who had begged for mercy. These were men of his own kind, his own race. He had fought in their army. He had worn their uniform, and he had just participated in their slaughter. He had turned his back on his world. Irrevocably. Finally. He had made a choice that could never be unmade. The price for this, the price for her. Was this a mountain of bodies? A betrayal so complete it had no name. He felt a wave of nausea, a soul sickness that was deeper than any physical pain. He had done this to protect her. And in that moment of profound self-revulsion, he felt her hand. It was small and dirty and bloody, but it was warm. It slid into his, her fingers lacing with his, a fierce, possessive grip. He turned his head, his vision blurred, and looked at her. Connie was not looking at the battlefield. She was not looking at her father, who was now walking toward them. She was looking at him. Her eyes, those dark, fiery eyes that had haunted him, were stripped bare of hatred, of suspicion, of fear. They were filled with an emotion so powerful, so absolute, that it struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was recognition. It was acceptance. It was a love as fierce and as unforgiving as the land itself. She saw the dead soldiers. She saw what he had done, and she was not ashamed of him. She was not disgusted. She was his, and he was hers. John Garrett, the man who had run from attachments, the man who believed love was a weakness, finally understood. He had been chasing a ghost. He had been running across a continent in search of something called freedom, a word he had defined as being alone, as being untethered. He had been wrong. This was freedom, this terrible, painful, bloody connection, this willingness to burn down the world for one other person. This was not a chain. It was an anchor. It was the only thing that was real. The freedom he had been seeking was a cold, empty room. This was a fire. It was a home. He had not found his freedom in the endless prairies, or the high, lonely mountains. He had found it in her. He had found it in the choice to stop running and to fight for something. He squeezed her hand. His bloody fingers gripped hers. "It is over," he whispered. "It is finished," she replied, her voice soft. Tawapi stopped in front of them. He was a terrifying figure, his body covered in sweat and blood. His eyes, so full of hatred when he had last seen John, were now unreadable. He looked at the dead soldiers. He looked at the white man. John, who was wounded, exhausted, and standing beside his daughter. He looked at their joined hands. He looked at John for a long, silent minute. He was weighing the world. This man had broken every rule. He was the enemy. He had brought the soldiers, and then he had fought them. He had killed his own people. He had saved his daughter's life. Not once, but 3 times. "You fight," Tawapi said, the English words rough in his throat. John nodded. He could not speak. "You bleed," the chief stated, his gaze falling to the wound on John's head, the dark stain on his ribs. "He is hurt," Connie said, her voice sharp, protective. He needs a healer." Tawapi looked at his daughter. He saw the way she stood, her body angled in front of John, protecting him even now. He saw the canvas jacket she wore, the jacket that belonged to the white man. He saw that his daughter, his warrior, was lost to him. She had chosen. The cost, the price of this victory was high, not just in blood. The world had changed. His daughter had tied her spirit to a tabo. This was a wound that might never heal. Tawapi turned and let out a sharp cry. Two of his warriors came forward. "Take him," he said in Comanche, gesturing to John. "He is not an enemy. He is with her." The warriors looked confused, but they obeyed. They moved to John, taking his arms, supporting him. He was weak, his legs suddenly giving out. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the screaming pain. He did not let go of Connie's hand. Connie did not let go of his. She limped beside him, her hand in his, as they were half carried, half led, away from the battlefield, away from the dead, toward the unknown future. John looked back, once, at the bodies of the soldiers, their blue uniforms stark against the red rock. He had done this. He had made his choice. He had killed his past. The question that echoed in his spinning, throbbing head was no longer if he could live with it. He had to. The question was, who was he now? He was a man with no people, no country, no name he could safely use. He was a traitor. He looked at Connie. Her face was set, resolute, as she looked forward, climbing the mountain. He was a traitor to everything he had been. But he was not alone, and as he held her hand, he knew, with a terrible, burning certainty, that it was the only thing that mattered. He could live with the man he had become, as long as he could live with her. The old life was over. This new one, born in blood, was all he had left. He drifted. The world was a smear of red pain, gray rock, and the constant rhythmic jolt of movement. He was on a travois, a crude sledge of poles and hides, being dragged upward, always upward. He was intensely cold, then burning, a fire licking at his insides. He was aware of the sky, a flat, indifferent blue. He was aware of the faces that sometimes swam into his vision, dark, painted faces that looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and pure, unadulterated hatred. He was the enemy. He was their prize, their wounded. He tried to move, but his body was a useless, heavy thing. He tried to speak, but his throat was raw. The only constant, the only anchor in the swirling, agonizing fog was a hand. Sometimes he would be seized by a violent shiver, his body convulsing, and the hand would grip his. It was small and warm, and it held him with a strength that defied its size. Sometimes he would cry out, a low, animal sound, as the fever dreams took him, as he saw the faces of the soldiers he had killed, their eyes wide with shock and betrayal, and the hand would be there, stroking his forehead, cool and damp, pulling him back from the edge. He did not know how long he walked in that gray land, half in, half out of life. Days, a week. He was moved from the travois to a lodge. It was dark, and smelled of wood smoke and sage and something medicinal that bit at his nostrils. He was laid on soft buffalo robes, and the hand was always there. He woke, once, to a sharp, burning pain in his side. An old woman, her face a web of 1,000 wrinkles, was pressing a hot, poulticed stone against his ribs. He cried out. The old woman just grunted, her eyes as cold and flat as river stones. She was not healing him. She was performing a task. Then Connie was there. She spoke to the old woman in a low, sharp tone. The old woman replied, her voice dismissive. Connie spoke again, her voice rising, and the old woman finally, reluctantly, nodded. She set about her work with a slightly gentler touch. John faded again. He was in a battle. The officer was lunging at him, his face purple. "Traitor!" he screamed. John saw the men he had shot. He saw the young boy begging for mercy. He had killed them. He had killed his own. He was a murderer. He was a traitor. He deserved to die. He felt himself slipping, letting go, sinking into the blessed, painless dark. No. A voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the fog. You will not die. I will not allow it. A hand slapped his face. Not hard, but a sharp, stinging slap. His eyes flew open. Connie was leaning over him, her face inches from his. Her hair was unbound, a black curtain around them. Her eyes were not pleading. They were burning. They were full of a terrible, demanding fire. You fought, she whispered, her voice a fierce rasp. You chose. You will not leave me now. You will live. Do you hear me? John Garrett, you will live. He stared at her. He had no choice. Her will was a physical thing, a rope that looped around him and hauled him, sputtering and protesting, back to the surface. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. She held a cup to his lips. It was a bitter, hot broth. He drank. It burned a path down to his stomach, and for the first time, he felt a small ember of life, separate from the pain. He lived. The healing was a slow, brutal process. He woke, truly, 3 weeks later. The fever had broken, leaving him weak as a newborn kitten. His head wound was a puckered, angry scar. His ribs were bound so tightly he could barely breathe. He was thin, his body gaunt. He was in a small teepee, set slightly apart from the main camp. Through the flap, he could see a high mountain valley, a place of impossible beauty, green meadows, a clear, rushing stream, and sheer, snow-capped peaks that ringed it like a fortress. This was their hidden place. This was the sanctuary. Connie was asleep, sitting upright against the lodgepole, her head bowed. Her face was thin, exhaustion carved into every line. Her own leg was bound, the wound healing. She had been tending to him. She had not left him. The woman he had seen as a warrior, all fire and steel, had become his nurse, his guardian. He looked at his hands. They were clean. His beard had been trimmed. He was wearing a soft buckskin shirt, not his own. She had cared for him. His body, in his weakness, the intimacy of it, the quiet, domestic reality of it, was more profound, more shaking than the desperate passion in the cave. That had been an ending. This was a beginning. He moved, and the rustle of the robes woke her. Her head snapped up, her hand instantly going to the knife at her belt. It was the warrior's reflex. Then she saw him. She saw his eyes, clear and sane, watching her. The tension left her body in a rush. She did not smile. Her people did not smile easily, but her face softened, the hard lines melting. You are awake, she said. How long? His voice was a dry croak. 23 days, she said. The healer. She said you would die. She said the white man's spirit was weak. She was wrong. He said, I told her she was wrong. Connie replied, her voice flat. I told her I would not let you. They looked at each other, the space between them thick with all the things they could not say. The battle, the killing, the cave. He was a white man. She was a Comanche. He had murdered his own people. She had brought an enemy into her home. They were both traitors. They were both exiles. Your father, John said, Tawapi. He is here, she said, her face hardening slightly. The people are here. We are safe. For now. He let you care for me. He is the chief, she said, as if that explained nothing and everything. He does not forget a debt. You fought for us. You saved my life. You are under his protection, but you are not one of us. John understood. He was a prisoner again, not of chains, but of circumstance. As he regained his strength, he learned the shape of this new life. He was an outcast, the tribe, what was left of it. had found its sanctuary, but it was a wounded, grieving people. They had lost many, and he was the living symbol of the world that had wounded them. The children would stop their play and stare at him, their dark eyes full of fear and hatred. The women would turn their backs when he approached the stream. The warriors, the men he had fought beside, would nod, a curt, reluctant acknowledgement, but they would not speak to him. He was Connie's Tabo. He was a ghost. Connie, too, was an exile. By choosing him, by tying herself to him, she had placed herself outside the circle. She was still the chief's daughter, and her bravery in the fight had earned her respect, but she was tainted. She was the woman who lay with the white man. They lived in their own lodge, apart from the others, a small, isolated island of two. John's old life, the one of the lone rider, had been lonely, but this was a new, more profound isolation. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, except for her. Their relationship, born in the fire of pursuit and the darkness of the cave, had to be rebuilt. The passion was still there, a hot coal beneath the surface, but it was banked, overshadowed by the reality of their situation. They were two broken, haunted people. He would wake in the night, his throat raw from a silent scream, the faces of the dead soldiers vivid behind his eyes. He would sit up, breathing hard, his body slick with sweat. He was a traitor, he was a murderer. And she would be there. She would not speak. She would simply move, her hand finding his in the dark, her warmth a steady presence beside him. She would not offer comfort or absolution. She would just be. She would share the wound. He learned, slowly, to talk. He told her about the war, about the mud, and the screams, and the emptiness afterwards. He told her about the man he had been, the man who believed in nothing. She, in turn, told him of her own ghosts, of the sister she had lost in a raid by soldiers, of the world that was vanishing, the buffalo that were gone, the land that was being stolen. They were not a white man and a Comanche woman. They were two survivors, their pasts shattered, their futures uncertain, their bond, forged in violence, was now being tempered in grief. The fire was becoming steel. It was not the desperate, frantic clutch of the cave. It was a deep, quiet, unbreakable loyalty. It was the steady, firm attachment of two people who had nothing left but each other. Tawapi watched them. John saw the chief, his face a granite mask, observing him as he learned to walk again. As he sat outside his lodge, repairing a bridle Connie had brought him. John knew he had to earn his place. He could not just be a mouth to feed, a burden on this struggling tribe. He began to work. He used his old skills. He was a good blacksmith, a good tanner. He could fix the rifles the tribe had, weapons they did not fully understand. He was methodical, silent, and tireless. He asked for nothing. He just worked. The warriors began to watch him. The man who had fought like a demon on the mountain now worked with the patience of a craftsman. He made their bullets more true. He made their knives sharper. Respect, slow and grudging, began to grow. He was not the Tabo. He was the one who works. The tribe itself was healing. Tawapi was a wise leader. He knew the old ways were ending. The fight on the mountain had been a victory, but it was the last of its kind. The army would be back, in greater numbers. The bluecoats were like ants. Kill a dozen, and 1,000 would come to the funeral. He sent scouts, not for war, but for peace. He made contact with other scattered bands. He was trying to bring his people together, to find a way to live in the white man's new world without being destroyed by it. One evening, Connie came to their lodge. She was carrying a hide, beautifully tanned and painted with the symbols of her family, of her life. "My father," she said, "will speak with you." John followed her. His leg was steady. His ribs were healed. He was strong again. He entered Tawapi's lodge. The chief was sitting alone by the fire. He gestured for John to sit. The snows will come soon, Tawapi said, his English slow but clear. We will be safe here for the winter. John nodded. After the winter, Tawapi continued, the soldiers will come. They will look for me. They will look for you. I know, John said. I will leave. I will not bring them here. You will leave, Tawapi said, and my daughter. She is your daughter, John said, his voice quiet. She is one of you. I cannot ask her to share my exile. I am a man with no people. You are wrong, Tawapi said. He looked at John, his eyes piercing. You have a people. You have her. Connie, who had been standing at the door, stepped into the firelight. You have chosen my daughter, Tawapi said to her, his voice full of a deep, aching sorrow and a profound respect. I have chosen, Connie said, her voice clear and strong. She walked to John and sat beside him, not touching him, but her presence a declaration. Tawapi looked at them, the white man and the Comanche woman, united, bound. He saw the strength in them, a strength born of pain and loss. The world is changing, Tawapi said, his voice a low rumble. The Comanche must change. We cannot fight the storm. We must bend, like the willow, or we will break, like the oak. We must find a new way. He looked at John. You are not my son. You will never be Comanche. Your skin is your skin. But you have a Comanche heart. You have a warrior's heart. You fought for my daughter. You fought for my people. You are her husband, and the husband of the chief's daughter is not an outcast. He held out his hand, not for John to shake, but palm up, a gesture of offering. On his palm lay a single eagle feather. You are a man with no tribe, Tawapi said, so you will be a man of two. You will be a bridge, or you will be the stone that breaks them both. This is your path. John looked at the feather. He looked at Connie. Her face was illuminated by the fire, and he saw, for the first time, a small, true smile. He took the feather. He did not know what it meant. Not really. He did not know what the future held. He was still a traitor. He was still haunted. The wounds of the past were not gone. They were a part of him now, woven into his soul. But as he sat there, with Connie beside him, the fire warm on his face, he felt something he had never felt before. Not the wild, desperate freedom of the prairie. Not the cold, empty peace of isolation. He felt like he was home. The winter came early and with a sudden, silent fury. Snow filled the high valley, burying the passes, sealing the Comanche remnant off from the world. The war, for now, was frozen. The soldiers would not come. The threat of pursuit was replaced by the older, more immediate enemies, starvation and cold. John Garrett, the man who was now Connie's husband, learned the rhythms of this new, static life. He was a wound in the heart of the tribe. Tawapi's acceptance had given him a lodge and his daughter's hand, but it had not given him a people. He was a white man. He was the Tebo who had killed other Tebos. He was a riddle, and the Comanche were a practical people who had little use for riddles. He worked. It was the only language he had left that they could understand. The warriors, their hunts limited by the deep snow, spent their time repairing weapons, and John became their armorer. His hands, scarred and sure, understood the inner workings of the repeating rifles they had captured. He fixed broken firing pins with slivers of metal, recasted bullets over the low fire, taught them how to measure powder with a new precision. He did not speak. He just worked, his head bowed, the scar on his scalp a raw, red mark. The warriors watched him. They did not trust him, but they respected his skill. They began to leave their damaged rifles outside his lodge, and in the morning, they would be fixed. He asked for nothing in return. Connie was his bridge, and she was his wall. She was the only one who spoke to him in the tongue he understood. And she was the one who translated his silent actions to her people. She, too, was changed. She was no longer just a warrior, the chief's daughter. She was the white man's wife. She had chosen this path, and she walked it with her head high. But he saw the cost. He saw the way the other women would fall silent when she came to the fire, the way they looked at her, then at him. She was an exile in her own home. Their lodge was their fortress. It was a small, quiet world, insulated from the judgment outside by thick, painted hides. The passion of the cave, that desperate, explosive fusion in the face of death, had cooled. It had not vanished. It had changed. It had deepened, settling into their bones like the winter cold. It became a new, shared language. It was in the way she would mend his torn shirt, her stitches small and neat, her head bent, the firelight catching the blue-black shine of her hair. It was in the way he would rise in the darkest part of the night to add wood to the fire, moving with a quiet grace so as not to wake her. It was in the sharing of the meager food, a piece of tough, smoked elk, each of them ensuring the other ate. It was a love built not on words or declarations, but on the small, daily acts of survival. But the ghosts did not sleep. The winter was long, and the darkness was absolute. John would wake, his heart a cold hammer in his chest, his skin slick with sweat. He would see the faces, the young soldier, his plea for mercy cut short, the officer, his eyes wide with shocked betrayal, the men he had shot from behind. Traitor. The word was a poison in his veins. He would slide from the robes, careful not to wake her, and go to the lodge opening. He would stare out at the night, at the snow falling, a white, silent accusation. He had bought his life, his love, with the blood of his own kind. He was a monster. He felt her hand on his back. She was there, awake, her warmth a sudden shock in the cold. She did not speak. She did not ask him about the dreams. She did not offer him the absolution he craved, the forgiveness he did not deserve. She simply stood behind him, her palm flat against his spine, her presence a silent, unwavering statement. You are here. I am here. We are. He would turn, burying his face in her hair, his arms wrapping around her, holding her with a strength that bordered on desperation. He was a drowning man, and she was the only solid land in an endless, black ocean. She would hold him until the shaking stopped, until his breathing slowed. She was his anchor. She was his truth. One night, as the ghosts clawed at him, he finally spoke. I killed them, he whispered into the dark, the words tearing from his throat. They were my people, they were boys. I killed them all. Connie pulled back, her hands framing his face, forcing him to look at her in the faint, flickering light of the embers. Her eyes were fierce. They were men, she said, her voice low and hard. They were men who came to kill us. They came to kill me. You fought for your life. No, he said, the word a groan. I fought for you. It is the same thing, she said. There is no difference. Do not look back. There is nothing there for us. There is only here. Only now. She kissed him. It was not the kiss of the cave. A kiss of desperation. It was a kiss of command. A kiss that sealed a pact. You are mine. He held her, and the ghosts receded. They did not vanish. They would never vanish. But they lost their power. They were just shadows, and she was the fire. The snows began to melt. The valley, locked in white, slowly bled green. The sound of the stream, once a muffled whisper, became a roar. With the spring came new life and new danger. The world was waking up. The scouts Tawapi had sent out returned. They brought news. The world had not forgotten. The massacre of the cavalry patrol had sent a shockwave through the territories. The army was moving. They were coming in force, not with patrols, but with columns. They were building a new fort on the Cimarron. They were hunting for the Quahadi, the renegade band. and for the white trader who led them. Tawapi called a council. John sat outside the circle, as was his place. He was not one of the people. He was Connie's husband. He listened to the warriors speak. Their voices were angry, full of fire. They wanted to fight. They had beaten the soldiers once. They could beat them again. Then Tawapi spoke. His voice was low and full of sorrow. The snows have melted, and the ants are returning. We killed 15. They send 1,500. We are a small people. We are the last of the Quahadi. We can fight, and we will die. Our children will die. Our women will die. The fire of our people will go out. The old way is gone. The war is over. We lost. The silence in the lodge was a heavy, suffocating thing. To hear their chief, the great warrior, speak these words was to hear the world end. We will not fight, Tawapi said. We will not run. We will go to them. We will go to the reservation. It is a bad place. It is a cage, but we will live. Our children will live. The Comanche will not die on a mountain. We will learn this new way. We will bend. We will survive. John's blood went cold. The reservation. He had seen them. They were prisons. They were open graves. Places where warriors were turned into beggars. Where the government rations were rotten. Where the spirit was broken. That night, in their lodge, Connie was silent. She was packing. You will go, John asked, his voice hollow. I am the chief's daughter, she said, her back to him. My people are going. I will go with them. And me. She stopped, her hands still. You cannot. The soldiers. They will not put you on a reservation. They will put a rope around your neck. They will hang you. John, they will hang you as a traitor. He knew she was right. His presence with them would be a death sentence for him, and a catastrophe for the tribe. It would prove every lie the army told about them. So I run, he said, his voice bitter. I go back to being a ghost. She turned, her face a mask of anguish. You will go, she said. Where they cannot find you, you will go north into the high mountains, where the army does not ride. You will go to the lands of the crow. Alone, he stated. You will be alive, she said, her voice breaking. He looked at her, the woman who had told him to live, the woman who had anchored his soul. She was sending him away, to save him. She was choosing her people, just as he had chosen her. He could not fault her for it. It was the only choice. I will not go, he said. You must, she cried, her hands clenching. I will not. I will not watch them hang you. I will not have your death on my spirit. I will not go, he said again, his voice quiet. He walked to her, taking her hands. They were cold. I will not be alone. We will not be separated. If you go to the reservation, I will go. I will ride in with you. Let them hang me. I do not care. I will not leave you. That is my choice. She stared at him, tears welling in her dark eyes, the first tears he had ever seen her shed. You are a fool, she whispered. I am your fool, he said. We are together, or we are dead. There is no other way. She wept, then a silent, racking grief, her face pressed against his chest. He held her, his decision made. He had lived his whole life as a coward, running from attachments. He would not run now. The next morning, as the tribe began to dismantle the camp, packing their few belongings for the long, final journey, Connie walked to her father's lodge. John stood outside, waiting. He was a dead man, but he was at peace. She was inside for a long time. When she came out, Tawapi was with her. The chief walked to John. He looked old, his face carved with a grief that was deeper than any mountain. You are a stone, Tawapi said, his voice a low rumble. A stone in my path. I cannot move you, and you will not move. I will not leave her, John said. If you ride with us, you will doom my people. Tawapi said, the soldiers will see you. and their hatred will be a fire. They will say we are a renegade band. They will kill us all. To get to you, you will be the death of us." "Then I will leave," John said, his heart breaking. "But she will go with me." Tawapi looked at his daughter. He saw the iron in her spine. He saw that she had already made her choice. He had lost her. "No," Tawapi said, and the word was a final, terrible judgment. "She will not. My daughter will not live in the wilderness, hunted like a wolf. She will not be the squaw of a white renegade. She is Kwahadi." "She is my wife," John said, his hand moving to his knife. "And she is my daughter," Tawapi roared, his own hand gripping his war club. "You will not take her." They stood, facing each other, the two men who loved her, ready to kill each other for her. "Stop!" Connie's voice was a whip crack. She stepped between them. "I will not be a prize. I will not be a stone. I will choose." She looked at her father, her face full of a love and a sorrow that mirrored his own. "My father, you are my blood. You are my people. I will love you until the sky falls. But my life, my spirit, it is his. I will not go to the reservation. It is a cage. I will not die in a cage, and I will not let him die, on a rope or in the wilderness." She turned to John. "And you will not die for me. We will live. We will find a place they cannot find. Not north, not south, but between." She looked back at her father. "Give us your blessing, my father. Give us 2 horses and supplies. Let us go. Let us find a life. We are not your people. We are not his people. We are our own." Tawapi looked at his daughter. So fierce, so strong. She was his blood. And she was right. She was the willow, bending. She was finding the new way. He looked at John, his eyes filled with a new, grudging respect. This man, this Tabo, had given his daughter a strength he had not known she possessed. He had made her a new thing. "You will go," Tawapi said, his voice hoarse. "There is a valley, 2 weeks' ride, to the west, across the high peaks. A place I knew as a boy. A hidden place. The white man does not know it. The army will not find it. There is water. There is game. You will go there. You will build your lodge. You will be ghosts." He turned and walked away, his back straight. He had saved his people, and he had lost his daughter. John and Connie left an hour later. They had 2 strong ponies, supplies, his rifle, her knife. As they rode out of the valley, the tribe was gathering, preparing for their long march to the reservation. John and Connie did not look back. They found the valley. It was just as Tawapi had said, a high green meadow, hidden from the world by a ring of sheer granite peaks. A waterfall fed a stream that was full of fish. The game was plentiful. It was a sanctuary. It was a paradise. They built their life. John cut logs, and, with an expertise that came from a life he thought he had forgotten, he built a small, solid cabin. Connie planted a garden, the seeds she had brought from her mother's stores. She hunted, her skill far greater than his, and tanned the hides. He worked the wood. They were a team. The ghosts were still there. He would still wake, sometimes, the word traitor on his lips. But he would open his eyes, and he would see the solid logs of the cabin he had built. He would smell the wood smoke from their fire, and he would feel her, warm and real, sleeping beside him. The ghosts grew quiet. They were just memories. They were the price he had paid for this. He had sought freedom, and he had found a cage of rock and sky, a cage he had built with his own hands, and he had found, in that cage, a peace he had never known. He was not a warrior. He was not a renegade. He was a husband. He was a man who had found his place. One evening, in the late summer, he was sitting outside the cabin, sharpening his axe. The sun was setting, painting the high peaks in strokes of orange and purple. Connie came to him. She had been at the stream. She stood before him, her hands clasped in front of her. "John," she said, her voice soft. He looked up. He had learned to read her face, every small sign. He saw a new light in her eyes, a softness, a fear, a profound joy. You are well?" he asked, rising to his feet. She took his hand, his large, scarred hand, and placed it on her stomach. "I am well," she whispered. "We are well." He stilled. He felt it, the slight, firm swell of her belly beneath the buckskin. A new life, a child, their child. He stared at her, his throat thick, his eyes stinging. A child, a bridge, a thing of both of them, a new beginning, born not of blood and fear, but of peace and love. He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her, holding her as if she were the most fragile, precious thing in the universe. He buried his face in her hair. He had no words. He looked up, at the mountains, at the vast, clean sky. He thought of the man he had been, the ghost who had ridden into the West, seeking an empty, cold freedom. He had fought, and he had betrayed, and he had killed, all to find his way here. He had learned the truth. A man did not fight for himself. A man did not fight for an idea. A man fought for his heart, and in that fight, in that love, he found a meaning deeper than any he had ever known. He was not a traitor. He was not a hero. He was just a man, and he was, finally, truly, free. Thank you for listening to this story. I am curious. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments. It is always a pleasure to see where the trail dust settles. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to help these stories be heard, hit that hype button. It helps more than you know.